I hope you're doing fine. Paul Mack here, and I want to talk to you about my favorite farm tool, the Froe. The Froe, F-R-O-E, Froe. The Froe is basically a long wedge with a sharp edge here, somewhat sharp, not really, with a handle that allows you to put leverage on the bolt of wood that you're splitting in half. Imagine a normal wedge. I've got this iron wedge here that's common for splitting a log. It's always good to have one or at least a couple of these around. But imagine this wedge were down in the end of a log or a small bolt of wood. And imagine how nice it would be if you had a handle attached to that so that you could put leverage one way or the other and split that log in half. Well, that's basically what a Froe is. It's an improvement on that idea, except instead of a narrow wedge, you've got a long wedge with an eye, and the handle is inserted in the eye so that when this is down in a bolt of wood, you can get some leverage on it and crack that board in half. The Froe has two bevels on it, a bevel on this side and a bevel on this side, equal angle, probably about 15 degrees is what they typically are. And the Froe is really not a sharp tool. It's fairly safe for kids to use wisely and safely, but it's for making, again, splitting wood, basically making shakes or shingles. Technically, a shingle is a sawn piece of wood that covers your roof to keep the rain off. Shakes are hand-split shingles, for lack of a better word, that cover a roof to keep the rain off. But there are other applications. I mean, you can use it to, like if you're splitting kindling for fire, this is a piece of rich pine. If you're splitting kindling for fire, it's a little bit safer than holding that and then hitting it with a hatchet or an axe. So this is be a good tool for your kids to use in that chore that has to be done every winter, making kindling to start your fires with, splitting kindling to start your fires with. And also, if you're one of those fortunate ones, blessed ones to have a wood cook stove, generally you use the cook stoves have very small fire chambers, so you use smaller pieces of wood generally in most cook stoves. And usually that was pine because it burns quickly. You're going to cook quick. You're not really using a cook stove to heat with. So these are kind of nice to use for splitting small stove wood is what the chore used to be back in the day. Again, it's relatively a safe implement for kids to use. I've had kids at my demonstrations at festivals and so forth. They love making shingles if they're old enough and tall enough and big enough to handle a mallet. You use a mallet to strike the Froe with. Some of them have long blades. I'll show you my main Froe here in a minute. Some of them are a little bit longer than others. I've got several that are different shapes. That looks like a homemade one that somebody got in a forge, a blacksmith got in a forge and bent this piece of metal around to form the eye and then put a rivet in there and made them a Froe. This one, sometimes they're shorter. In our area of Arkansas, shakes for roofing were generally made out of pine because it was more prevalent than larger straight-grained oaks, which is what you need, straight grains and no knots to be able to make a good shake. Boy, look at this one. This one was fashioned, so the eye doesn't even go completely around it, but this is a heavy, heavy Froe. Probably might not even need a mallet for this one. It was made out of a very heavy piece of iron. Somebody took, I don't know what this was, but man, it took a lot of heating up because that's almost half an inch thick here. So they put some time in on this one and then had to, looks like, either cut that out with a torch or maybe on the forge, I don't know. Looks like it might have been a dozer blade or something. This is a stout little deal. Necessity is the mother of invention. Somebody really needed them a Froe really bad. You could make your own if you're, somewhat handy blacksmith and you got a forge. What people commonly do is take the leaf spring from an automobile, go to a junkyard, get you a leaf spring or two or three for various projects. those leaf springs, since they are springs, they're made of high carbon steel and very good for making an implement that you're going to need to keep a good sharp edge on after you shape it. Then you would temper it, but you can take a leaf spring, put it in your forge, and make your basic shape. Make the eye where the handle is going to go, and bend it on back around. You could do like this one guy did and put a rivet in it. Or you can just, like he did, obviously just round enough to hold the handle. And sometimes they would, if you're really good and can actually forge that metal back, that'd take a good blacksmith to. Or you can just, bring it on around and join that end back together, or weld it, whatever you wanted to do. But a leaf spring's good for that. And then once you, putting in the forge, taking it out, setting it to the anvil, and pound out your shape, and get your rough 15 degrees on each side, roughly on each side. And then let that cool and possibly take it to a grinder, or take a grinder to it, and finish up your 15-degree bevel on there. Again, doesn't have to be very sharp to do what it's supposed to do. In fact, it's less dangerous if it's not too entirely sharp. And then once that cools, to get your temper in it, this is one that I bought or found somewhere, and when I found it, somebody had beat it with a hammer, and it was all, it was upset and kind of flattened out on top, had some damage to it. And I was at a festival doing my farming demonstration, and not far from me was a pretty good blacksmith. And I had this with me, and the blacksmith actually wanted me to make him a mallet. And so I was over there demonstrating how to make mallets. And so I said, I'll make you a deal. If you will put this in your forge and get the shape back, I'll make you a mallet. So that ended up being a good swap. And he got a mallet, and I've got the shape back in this Froe. The only thing it needs is to be tempered, which when I go to do that, what I'll probably do is I could do it in the forge there, heat it up with a torch or something until you begin seeing, it takes a while, but until you begin seeing that bluish tint, that purplish tint, and then you take the fire off of it, and when you see that blue start to move toward the end, you quench it in some oil, and it should be ready to go. The main thing about tempering, it's not like rocket science, or well, for some people it is, not me. But the main thing about tempering is that you don't want it so brittle that the edge is going to break, and you don't want it so malleable that every time you hit it, you put a dent in it with a mallet. So you just want enough temper in it that'll hold its shape for the next 100,000 shakes you make. Now the handle of a Froe can be made out of hickory. I think this one's ash. Man, I don't know what this one. Somebody just looks like they took a limb out of the woods and stuck it in there. These look like ash. Mine is. We've got another one down here. I'll show you in a second. That's hickory. Oak is fine. In fact, oak is pretty stout. That'd make a decent Froe handle. But basically, the handle is rounded in shape, and also the eye. I forgot to mention the eye is slightly tapered. They ought to be. They're not always, but they ought to be slightly tapered, kind of that way, so that when you go to put in your handle, and this is not a Froe handle, it's just a piece of wood, but when you go to put in your handle, it would go from the top, and you would want that handle to just fit maybe somewhere right in there to where it's snug. And when you're shaping up, you got a piece of wood that you're shaping up to fit into your eye. If you want to get a really good solid fit, a little trick I learned is you can take some charcoal out of the wood stove, just some black soot, and with your finger run it around and coat the inside of that eye, and then take the handle that you're working on and put it down in there until you get it snug. It may not even go all the way. You're still whittling on it, and you get it in there and you kind of twist it the way it's going to be. and then you take it out and you keep whittling on this in the shaving horse with a draw knife or a spoke shave or however you want to do it, or pocket knife. And you keep whittling on it. You whittle away the black parts, the sooty parts. And then you do it again. You put it back in. Maybe that time it goes a little bit further. You twist it around. You get it black in a certain area. Whittle the black parts off, and you just keep going back and forth. It's kind of fun. I enjoy that. You go back and forth until you get a better fit and a better fit, and pretty soon it's getting close to the edge. You don't want to whittle so much that it goes on through, because then you got to start all over. The other thing when you're fitting the handle in, and this is not, it's not absolutely necessary, but it's always good. On this handle here, you can see the rings of the tree are go this way, and so on your froe, you're going to be putting pressure this way and this way to get your leverage. So you want those rings parallel to the direction of the leverage. That way, it won't necessarily break, because sometimes wood handles tend to break with the rings. So you want those rings against the direction of leverage. That's a good tip for putting a handle in an axe or a hoe or really anything. Or when you're shopping for a handle, look for how those rings are set in that handle. When you're finished making the handle and it seems to fit, you can saw down the middle of the top of that handle. And this person did, and they put I don't know if you can see that, they put an iron wedge in there and then just hammered it in, made it good and stout. It ain't going anywhere. A lot of these don't have any wedges at all. Mine doesn't have a wedge. Pound it on in there. Usually they're good, and if they move a little, just pound on it some more. So wedge or no wedge, doesn't matter really. You don't want to hit these with a hammer. See, this one, somebody's hit it with a hammer. It's slightly upset. You can see it starting to mushroom there. And somebody even hit it with an axe, it looks like. I don't know. You want to use a wooden mallet whenever you're working with a froe, and these are somewhat simple to make. I like making mine out of hickory. In fact, if you want to, you can go, after this, you can go watch my video on making hickory mallets and mauls. I'll have that link for that video in the description below. Now, to get the proper leverage on a bolt of wood that you're splitting, you can imagine it would be, here's a froe that I've started in a little bolt of wood. You can imagine just like this, you could try to split it, but it's awkward, having it here with nothing to hold this. And, it'd also be awkward to put this in a vise and then crank down on it, because when you got down here, you'd have to unscrew the vise, so that's awkward. What you could do is leave the vise open and not crank down on it, but you got to have that, you got to have that leverage one way or the other to be able to split the board on down. And the best tool, the traditional tool for that would be a riving brake. Riving, R-I-V-I-N-G, rive. To rive means to split. That's kind of an old word that's out of style. But a riving brake is what you would use to hold that bolt of wood. Basically, it's just a forked tree, and you hold that bolt in the crotch of the tree, and then you can put pressure on it one way or the other to make your split. Quickly, I wanted to just mention some shake making tips. And again, you can watch some of my videos on how to make a riving brake or how to actually make shakes for more detail. But basically, you start in the middle. You set the froe blade right in the middle every single time, because in theory, you want to split the board in the middle all the way down. Now, as you know, splits don't always go the way you want them to go. Sometimes they might run thin or run out to one side or the other. So you say, well, how do you manage that? I'll tell you, there's a tip. It doesn't always work. And by the way, it's always best to rive shakes when the tree is still green, is not completely cured like this board is. And so when you start the froe into the wood and you pound it with the mallet, once you get the mallet sunk into the wood and the top of it is no longer even with the board, you're through with the mallet. You don't keep hitting this side with the mallet, or the froe will start to come out of the piece of wood. So once you get it sunk in there, from that point forward, it's just a matter of using your handle. I mean, you made it, you might as well use it. And so you put it in the brake and you leverage back and forth, theoretically, until you split it in half perfectly. And you've got 2 shakes instead of 1 bolt. You can put this bolt either this way or this way. Inside, you're turning it to and fro. Get it? Froe. You're turning it to and fro. And then when you're finished, you have frown the wood in 2. How about that? Things don't always go as planned, and sometimes that crack starts to run to one side or the other. Here's a tip. If you get into it and you realize that the crack is running to, let's say it's running to this side, well, you put your thin side, what's about to be the thin side, you put that thin side up in the brake, and then if you will put a downward pressure, and by down I mean toward me, if you'll put pressure on that top thin one and continue your leverage, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time that crack will tend to want to run back to the center, and you can control it. If it starts to go too far to this side, just flip it around again, put a little pressure on the top, and keep throwing it down until hopefully you have 2 shakes and not 1 shake and a piece of scrap paper. So, I talked about earlier, in our area, they made shakes out of pine. If you're making pine shakes or cypress, you want to split those with the rings of the bolt. If you are making shakes out of red or white oak, you want to split that against the rings. If you get those backwards, the shakes will have a tendency to split if you put a nail in them. So always remember that. Pine and cypress are with the rings, red and white oak against the rings. And if you're doing cedar's fun to do because you can do cedar any which way. Cedar just doesn't typically care. Our cedar trees around here have so many knots, though, that it's usually hard to find a nice section of a cedar that doesn't have a knot that's going to mess you up at exactly the place you don't need it to be. The only place to find good cedars like that are the big ones in the cemeteries, and they typically don't want you cutting those down, I've noticed. The beauty of the Froe, it's one of those tools that just has a primitive beauty to it. I've told you before, I love a tool that is a good combination of metal and wood. It just makes you feel good inside. And the Froe is one of those tools that just looks good hanging on the wall. And then if your name starts with an L, you can always do that. And hang it right above your computer or TV while you're watching Farmhand's Companion. Your wife will love it. Well, I guess that's all I have to say about my favorite farm tool, the Froe. The Froe. If you have something you'd like to add to today's discussion about the Froe, please feel free to do that in the comment section below. I enjoy reading those. I really do. They're fun to read. And also, I want to remind you about our little general store here in Catagap that my family and I run. It's called Gap Mercantile. And I do try to keep a number of farm tools in there, antique tools, woodworking tools, some of them collectible, some of them still quite practical, some of them rusty. But hey, that's your job to get them and clean them up. So come see us if you're ever on vacation and you want to vacation in beautiful Southwest Arkansas. Please feel free to drop by Gap Mercantile. Make sure we're open. In the description, I'll have a link for the store, so you want to click on that and see all there is to see about Gap Mercantile in Catagap, Arkansas. So come see us. You might even find a Froe in there. Who knows? I try to keep one. If I can part with it, I'll put one in there. And one more thing I wanted to mention is a book I've written called Common Trees and Their Uses for the Small Farm or Homestead. Now this book, I wish I'd had, I'm serious about this. I wish I'd had this book when I was a younger man, because not only is it a picture identification guide complete with color photographs of the tree trunks and the tree leaves, so that you can, identify what tree you've got in your yard. Even if it's winter, you can look at the trunk. Not only is it a handy identification guide for each tree, but it has a section on each tree and how they're useful on the farm. In other words, what type of tree makes the best handle for a saw, what makes the best handle for a hoe, what makes the best handle for an axe, and the characteristics of that wood. And as if that weren't good enough, underneath each section, it has the things that you can make out of that particular tree. So, a good book to have, Common Trees and Their Uses. If you're interested and you want more details, go to our website, farmhandscompanion.com, and go to the general store page. I'll have a link in the description. Don't worry about all that. I'll have a link, and you can go and read all about the book. You're going to want to buy it for your husband or for your wife or for your kids. So, Common Trees and Their Uses. I guess that's about it. I'm Paul Mack, and I will talk at you later.